Across northern Nevada, the Hawk Fire has already injured at least 6 people, 3 civilians and 3 first responders, and officials say the only reason no one has died is that tens of thousands of residents managed to get out in time. And more than 10,000 homes and businesses are still in the dark tonight. Highways are closed behind the fire line. Reno's General Aviation Airport has stopped all flights. A hospital in the fire's path has been emptied out. Here is the important part. Just as firefighters try to hold the line overnight, forecasters are warning that winds are set to shift and strengthen on Monday, threatening to push the fire in a new and less predictable direction. Fire officials now describe the Hawk Fire as one of the fastest-growing wildfires the Reno area has seen in years. It ignited near Hawk Meadow Trail, just north of Cold Creek Trail, at around 11:25 in the morning on Saturday, and it exploded into one of the most destructive fires in the region's recent history, with wind gusts near 49 miles per hour and humidity dropping into the 11 to 21% range. According to fire behavior analyses, instead of staying on one hillside, it tore across an entire corridor of the wildland-urban interface, from the ridgelines above Verde and Mogul, across the Somerset foothills, through Cold Springs instead, all the way to the base of Peavine Peak and into the northern edges of Reno itself. At its peak, more than 90,000 people were under some form of evacuation order or warning. Satellite images from NOAA's GOES 18 satellite on Saturday showed towering pyrocumulus clouds rising from the fire's core, with the smoke plume's heat signature so intense it saturated the satellite's infrared sensors within hours of ignition. In the hills near Somerset in Washoe County, the fire's footprint reached about 15,040 acres, and across the Peavine Peak area, wind gusts built up to about 49 miles per hour on the fire's first night, heavy enough to send embers a mile ahead of the flame front and ignite new spot fires before crews could respond. In Washoe County, evacuation orders piled up past 42,000 residents, breaking the regional record set by the Davis Fire, which forced only 20,000 people from their homes 2 years earlier. And with relative humidity plunging toward 11% through the afternoon, turning any stray ember into a direct threat to entire neighborhoods still waiting for the order to leave. But the scale of this disaster only becomes clear when you follow what happened next, hour by hour, as the fire rolled from the western foothills toward the edge of Reno itself. In the days before the first flames were reported, the region was already primed for exactly this kind of disaster. Forecasters with the National Weather Service had issued red flag warnings across northern Nevada as dry offshore winds and single-digit humidity took hold, heading into the weekend, stretching a long corridor of fire danger from the Sierra foothills toward the high desert east of Reno. Governor Joe Lombardo's office had already been briefed on the elevated risk. Road crews were on standby, and families across Washoe County had spent the summer watching drought conditions tighten their grip on the hillsides above their neighborhoods, knowing a single spark could turn into exactly what happened next. The Hawk Fire showed its strength within hours of ignition, tearing through grass and brush and climbing toward roughly 2,500 acres before authorities had even finished mapping the first evacuation zone. As the fire shifted northeast into the Somerset and Stead areas, dry grass mixed with strong afternoon winds, turning quiet residential streets into narrow corridors of smoke and falling ash. Authorities reported residents fleeing on foot when vehicles became gridlocked, first responders pulling people from homes with only minutes to spare, and at least 6 injuries linked to smoke exposure and the chaos of a fast-moving evacuation along roads never designed to move this many people at once. By Saturday evening and into the early hours of Sunday, the heart of the fire was tearing across the Peavine Peak area and the northern edge of Somerset. Grass ignited, brush cracked, and entire hillsides went up under the weight of sustained wind gusts, pushing the fire's footprint past 10,000 acres by Sunday morning, according to fire officials tracking its growth hour by hour. In the Cold Springs area and parts of northern Washoe County, totals exceeded 13,000 acres by Sunday afternoon, shutting down schools, closing major roadways, and forcing thousands of additional residents from homes they had only just settled into for the weekend. In Reno and parts of Washoe County, the fire's reach exceeded 15,000 acres by Sunday evening, closing U.S. Route 395 in both directions, shutting every school district campus except one small rural K-12 building, and forcing the evacuation of a specialty hospital whose patients had to be moved to facilities outside the fire's path. Somerset picked up the earliest and heaviest damage of any single neighborhood. Stead and Cold Springs climbed into the fire's direct path by nightfall, areas that had not faced a blaze this close since the Pine Haven fire tore through similar terrain years earlier. When you look at the human toll of the Hawk Fire, even the injury count does not line up neatly across every report. Different agencies and local outlets are counting incidents in different ways and on different timelines. Washoe County officials have confirmed 6 injuries directly tied to the fire, 3 civilians and 3 first responders, as of Sunday evening. Other outlets covering the story from local hospitals describe a slightly wider toll, citing patients treated for smoke inhalation and minor burns who were never formally logged in the county's official count. Emergency room staff in the region say the real number of people who sought treatment for smoke-related symptoms during the fire's first 36 hours is almost certainly higher, while cautioning that a full accounting will not be possible until the evacuation order lifts. Behind those numbers are patterns that keep repeating in fast-moving wildfires like this one. In Somerset and Stead, first responders describe injuries tied to smoke inhalation among residents who waited too long before leaving their homes. Emergency crews are reporting burns among firefighters caught by sudden shifts in wind direction while holding containment lines on the foothills above Cold Springs. In neighborhoods closest to Peavine Peak, evacuees were hurt in the crush of traffic on roads never built to move tens of thousands of vehicles at once, with several reports of minor collisions and people abandoning cars to flee on foot. And across Washoe County, health officials link a wider wave of breathing difficulties to smoke that has settled over the valley, especially among older residents, young children, and anyone with existing lung or heart conditions. Everyone tracking the fire agrees on one point. This was not a wildfire that stayed on a distant hillside while people watched from a safe distance. It moved into homes, onto highways, and toward a hospital. And in each of those places, it gave people very little time to react. Inside Washoe County's hospital system, another quieter emergency has been building since Saturday. The same fire that closed highways and cut power to thousands of homes also forced Northwest Specialty Hospital to evacuate its patients entirely, moving people who depend on round-the-clock monitoring to facilities outside the fire's reach on short notice. Since the evacuation began, patients, including some recovering from surgery and others managing chronic conditions, have had to be transferred mid-treatment to hospitals already stretched thin by a fire that has displaced tens of thousands of people into shelters and hotel rooms across the region. For families trying to track down a relative who was moved without much warning, it is a logistical strain layered on top of an already frightening night. There's the visible damage, burned hillsides, blackened roadside brush, and homes reduced to foundations. And then there is the slower, less visible damage, missed medical appointments, lost work shifts, and families paying out of pocket for hotel rooms because their own house is still standing, just sitting empty inside a mandatory evacuation zone.
Even as fire crews claim some ground overnight, the danger from the Hawk Fire has not passed. Roughly 10,000 customers are still without power, especially across the Stead, Cold Springs, and Somerset areas of Washoe County. Daytime humidity in some of these areas is expected to stay in the low teens on Monday, turning every gust of wind into a serious risk of new fire growth for elderly residents, families with young children, and anyone who has not yet been able to leave. Downed power lines and unsafe roads have left entire neighborhoods cut off for going on 2 full days now, and fire officials are warning that in the hardest-hit pockets, residents should not expect to return home for several more days. Here's the important part. While Washoe County is still trying to hold this fire back, forecasters are tracking shifting winds just west of Reno that could push flames toward areas that have not yet been touched. Early projections from fire behavior analysts suggest wind gusts could climb back toward 45 miles per hour by Monday afternoon, with humidity dropping into the single digits in some canyons, enough to create explosive fire growth if those two conditions line up at the same time. Containment lines dug overnight are still fragile. Fuel breaks cut by bulldozer crews are untested against a real wind event, and thousands of homes along the fire's western edge remain exposed. A second round of strong wind on top of that could trigger new evacuations, fresh structure losses, and another night of gridlocked roads just as residents are hoping to finally go home. County leaders in Washoe, Story, and Lyon counties have already put crews on standby, warning that a wind shift could send the fire toward communities that depend on a single 2-lane road for evacuation. For towns that depend on that one road, a closure can cut off not just traffic, but fuel, food, and any chance of getting an ambulance in or a family out. Across Washoe County, the response effort is now shifting from pure containment into a longer, more grinding recovery phase, even with the fires still at 0% contained. NV Energy has kept outages relatively steady at around 10,000 customers since Saturday night, after proactively cutting power to prevent new ignitions along threatened lines. In Reno, utility crews say roughly 250 natural gas customers also remain without service after safety shutoffs in the fire's path. Crews are working around the clock, but company officials say some pockets in Stead and Cold Springs should prepare for several more days without power while damage assessment continues. Washoe Stead Airport, a hub for general aviation and air tanker operations, has been closed to non-firefighting traffic since Saturday, grounding private flights while keeping the runway clear for aerial firefighting crews. Reno Tahoe International Airport, farther south, has stayed open throughout the fire, though several airlines and hotel chains have waived change and cancellation fees for travelers and evacuees affected by road closures on U.S. Route 395. The American Red Cross has been running the main shelter at the Reno Sparks Convention Center since Saturday night, where roughly 465 evacuees spent their first night away from home on cots inside the main hall. A second site at the Evelyn Mount Community Center filled to capacity within hours, forcing county officials to direct new arrivals back toward the convention center or to hotels that have begun waiving standard cancellation fees for evacuees. Volunteers are handing out meals, water, and information about a separate large animal shelter set up at the Ironwood Event Center, while caseworkers try to connect displaced families with longer-term housing support before the shelters themselves reach their own limits. Every campus in the Washoe County School District, along with Truckee Meadows Community College and Corral Academy, canceled classes on Monday, with only the small Gerlach K-12 school outside the fire zone staying open. Nevada Governor Joe Lombardo has kept his state of emergency declaration in place, and roughly 70 Nevada National Guard troops, along with 2 helicopter crews, remain deployed to support evacuation security and aerial firefighting alongside the roughly 800 personnel already assigned to the fire. The National Weather Service has extended its red flag warning for the Reno area into Monday evening, citing the same combination of low humidity and gusty afternoon wind that fueled the fire's explosive growth over the weekend, and urging residents to keep evacuation supplies packed and ready, even outside the current mandatory zones. Here's the important part. This fire is not competing only with itself for resources. With the national wildfire preparedness level sitting at its highest tier, level 5, and nearly 80 large fires still burning uncontained across the country, mutual aid crews that Washoe County might normally call in from neighboring states are already committed elsewhere, including thousands of firefighters tied up on the Little Giant fire, burning through more than 140,000 acres in Washington state. Emergency managers say the next 24 hours will be critical as they try to hold containment lines, restore power to the hardest-hit neighborhoods, and reopen schools and roads before the next wind shift arrives. In the weeks ahead, the Hawk Fire is likely to be remembered as more than just another wildfire season headline. Fire officials, emergency managers, and policymakers are already filing it under the label historic because of how quickly it grew, how close it came to a major population center, and how many systems it touched within its first 36 hours. It exposed weak points that officials in the region have warned about for years. A single major highway that becomes a bottleneck the moment tens of thousands of people try to leave at once. A power grid that has to be shut off deliberately just to avoid becoming an ignition source of its own. And neighborhoods built directly against dry, fire-prone hillsides that are still not fully prepared for a blaze that can grow from a hiking trail to 15,000 acres in a day and a half. At the same time, scientists and climate analysts are careful with their language. No single wildfire can be blamed entirely on climate change, but the Hawk Fire fits into a pattern that experts say is becoming more familiar across the American West. A warmer, drier atmosphere pulls more moisture out of grass and brush earlier in the season. That means when strong wind events do line up with already parched vegetation, the result can be faster fire growth, longer fire seasons, and less time for communities to prepare before the next ignition. The Hawk Fire is also prompting questions about investment. How much should be spent to widen evacuation routes or add new ones in fire-prone suburbs like Somerset instead? How to upgrade power lines, water systems, and emergency alerts built for a smaller, slower-moving Reno? How to improve public warning systems so that people understand not just that a fire is burning nearby, but how little time they may actually have once it starts moving. And just as important, how to protect the most vulnerable residents, people without cars, older adults living alone, and anyone who cannot evacuate quickly on their own. In the end, the story of the Hawk Fire is not just a list of acres and evacuation numbers. It's a reminder of how quickly normal life can break down when dry vegetation, strong wind, and a single spark all collide at the edge of a growing city. A fire that started near a hiking trail managed to close a major highway, empty out a hospital, force tens of thousands of people from their homes, and leave a damage total that officials say will take weeks to fully understand. For families across Washoe County, the Hawk Fire will be remembered not as a headline, but as the weekend they packed what they could carry and didn't know if their house would still be standing when they came back. For those in fire country now looking ahead, the message is simple. Pay attention to official evacuation orders the moment they are issued, not after smoke is already visible from your window. Have a plan for what you will do if the power fails, the roads close, or a second fire breaks out while this one is still burning. Check on neighbors who might not be able to evacuate on their own. And as Washoe County and other fast-growing areas across the West debate how to rebuild, the choices they make will decide how ready these communities are the next time a spark meets dry brush and strong wind.